Hello and welcome to episode 2 of eCommerce Matters, brought to you by BlackCurve. BlackCurve helps e-commerce businesses make pricing decisions. Today we're answering the question, why competitor data is crap. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague and co-star, a regular co-star on all of these podcasts and webinars, Dr Rob Horton. Hello, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good, mate. I'm still unsurprisingly in sunny Hampstead. Not much has changed.
Not much has changed, absolutely. But you did show me prior to this that you have been hand delivered and baked with love a cookie by your other half. So I'm very jealous of that.
Yeah, well, there seems to be flour back in the shop, so that's pretty useful. I don't know about anyone else, but that was the story of our lockdown: was unable to get hold of flour by any means.
So you've heard it here first, then, that lockdown is easing because Rob now has access to flour. So if you don't learn anything in today's podcast, that might be it. So let's talk business. Let's talk why competitor data is crap. Now, as when this title was first posed to me, as a founder of a pricing optimization software company, and as somebody who gets revenue from competitor data, I was a bit, surprised that this topic was muted to me. But when it was spoken about in a bit more detail, I understood it more. And definitely when I hear about the nuances of competitor data and see the work that happens behind the scenes in order to make it more effective, and also as I understand more and more about how businesses are using competitor data, and some of them should be using it more effectively than they are. So the first point I wanted to touch upon to tackle this question is really about, I'm personally passionate to help businesses not blindly follow competitor data. It's one of the reasons that I founded BlackCurve in the first place. I think Rob, you agree that competitor data is very strong when used in the right context. It helps you be market efficient when used in the right context. But there is a habit that forms in certainly in the e-commerce companies and retailers that we come across, that when they collect competitor data, it's almost, once they've set their rules in which to, where they want to be in the market, it sometimes can be a set and forget attitude, and they're often blindly following the competitor pricing that they see. Sometimes they don't know, to the detriment of their business, so they're following pricing in terms of reducing price sometimes when they don't have to. So is that what you see, Rob, as well?
Yeah, I think similarly to you, I've banged on about this a lot, especially from a science perspective, because the real issue I have is not with competitor data. It's if your only strategy is to follow your competitors, you don't actually have a strategy. You have a mixture of everyone else's pricing strategy, and that's the key danger. So and the real issue there is that what works for them may not work for you. They may have a different relationship with a supplier. They may have, or certainly will have, a different position in the marketplace on certain goods. If I set up robshop.com, heard it here first.
I think that domain name is available if you'd like.
Yeah. And I try and go after John Lewis or another major retailer, and I follow their pricing, I'm going to be in trouble because I'll probably be expensive relative to the rest of the market, and I won't have any brand identity, brand DNA to reinforce that. So I think that's the core issue there, is that you end up, you lose margin, you lose sales, but really you're not in control, and you're not setting the cadence with which your business interacts with the marketplace.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? If you don't know what their buying team have managed to do. So you don't know if their buying team has negotiated an agreement with that supplier that if they manage to shift a certain amount of stock, for example, they might get that rebate at the end of the month. And in which case, if you're following them, their cost prices could be a lot lower than yours. So their margin's going to be greater, and then you're just eroding your margin and and you're in a downward spiral, you're in a downward game. The only thing that you're competing on or trying to compete on is price. You're not trying to establish, do you have any more power than that particular price? So it's certainly something we see time and time again.
Yeah. I think it's the funniest thing for two people who work from a pricing company is the more and more we do this, the more we realize that it's just one piece of the puzzle and often not the most important piece, right? It's like there are going to be goods where you need competitor data and you need to follow it. If they're easily accessible, if they're high volume traded, that's it. But there's a whole host of other reasons not to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're trying to find, the whole term of price optimization, isn't it? You're trying to find where you have pricing power, and pricing power in itself determines where you don't need to worry about what your competitors are doing, right? Because if you have a fantastic brand, or if you have the best delivery return policy, or if in my shopping habits, if that particular supplier puts Haribo in the box, that I'm gonna continue to buy from that, and I couldn't care less whether or not I could get that product cheaper from a competitor, right? We all have our own habits, and it's about finding where they have pricing power. So if competitor data, if businesses are not using competitor data in the right manner, how can they start to get more out of the competitor data that they're using? What should they do first?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we are not by any means saying, and I want to make this really clear, that we're not saying that you don't need competitor data. You do. It is super important, right? What we are saying is that it's probably worth being a bit cannier or smarter with it than you have been. The people I'm aware of, the businesses I'm aware of that use it most successfully, with us and outside of us, actually, it's worth saying, layer it with other data sources. So they will follow the competitor movements, and then that will trigger off like an analytics process to go and look at the marketplace. Why do I think they're making that price change? Is this a good price change? Is this a bad price change? Normally, and that kind of triggers a whole investigation. Normally, you kind of sit within two bounds. If it's a small price change on a product, actually, sure, following your competitors, and if that's your strategy on those products, wave it through, fine. But say someone drops the price by 10, 15%, that's a flag, right? What's happening there? Do they have too much stock? I mean, unfortunately, at the minute, are they going into liquidation? Are they just dumping? You don't know, right? So that's kind of stage one, just on competitor data and the marketplace itself. The next thing to do is really just start using the other data sets you have available. How well is the product selling? How much stock do I have? What's my advertising spend on this product? Because there's a lot of hidden costs, and I often think people don't think about in terms of pricing and margin and the rest of it. In that your competitor might be lower, but you might have market dominance because you put a big campaign behind it. So they're having to drop the price to even begin to compete with you for visibility.
And that's something which we'll probably look at later on in the podcast, in terms of, you get into all sorts of games with when you're collecting competitor prices from Google Shopping, that sometimes you can sponsor your post to appear higher than somebody else, and you might be more expensive or cheaper, but by that very nature you're more visible to the end consumer, and people are fundamentally lazy and impatient, and they sometimes click the first thing that they're presented with. So there's a whole secondary, third, fourth, fifth, sixth layer behind just what the competitor price is alone. And so if retailers and e-commerce companies are just starting out and have got competitor data at the moment, and that's the only thing that they have at their disposal today, how can they very quickly, let's say that they've set arbitrary rules to be within a certain parity of chosen competitors, how can they make that more effective now? Is there certain indicators they can look out with in terms of where they should be following and where they shouldn't be following?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we do internally quite a lot, especially when we're talking to newer clients, is really getting an understanding, because actually the competitor data, if you have it historically especially, gives you an understanding of your space, right? So you can look at how many price changes are being made on a given product and how often. And that, even without sales or stock or the rest of it, will give you quite a nice indication of what's a highly competitive product, what's everyone bidding on, and what isn't. And so if you can find kind of products that you know sell well, but you aren't seeing price changes in, or that kind of aggressive marketplace, that's a real edge for you there, because you know you've got a piece of market dominance, and you can either leave it be or start playing with the price, either to make more margin or whatever. And you can also look at products that aren't selling well, that prices aren't moving, because you can test if that's price driven, right? You can lower the price knowing that people are unlikely to follow you because they're not looking at it. So you might be able to steal a march. Now, if there's no demand, there's no demand. But it could be, and what's often the case is that things are slightly mispriced and you make them a little bit cheaper, and suddenly they become a lot more attractive. This is often the case with products that cannibalize against each other. And this you won't see in competitive data, and we'll get probably more into it later. But in the competitive data world, we talk a lot about like-for-like matches. So I have this product, and I want to know basically what everyone else is selling this exact product at. What people often don't do is, well, what's competing with this product? So say it's a good example, something like a pint glass, something really indiscriminate, right? And so I could search for that very specific pint glass and see that is £1, and everyone else has it as £1 and no one's buying it. That's because there's a very similar pint glass that costs 75p and everyone's buying that. And so you can kind of highlight these secondary, what would I call them? Secondary levers around your competitor data set that you wouldn't get just by looking at the pure data.
Yeah, I think you can to echo your statement earlier that we strongly believe that competitor data is a powerful data set, and I think that's echoed again by our studies that show, well, prior to the lockdown, that actually where there was a competitor overlap, 52% of the time on average we would have been within parity with the market. Okay, so then that means that 48% of the time you've got to continue what you were saying, you've got to consider your other data sets available to help you make those decisions. So I think it's really interesting that competitor data, when used effectively, can help you identify where you've got to move price. So what are some of the challenges that you've seen from an actual collection point of view? So you're going out there, you're collecting your competitor data, you've got it. You know, what are some of the myths that was sort of happening behind the scenes from a technology point of view?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting one, because competitor data collection is very easy to do, but very hard to do well, I think. So in broad terms, let's stick with Google Shopping, or just because bespoke data aggregation is a topic in of itself. But realistically, what you do is you mimic a human search path. So you write a script or a program that takes in a search term, spits that into Google, and takes the results. Which is actually, if you've got a half decent programmer, quite straightforward, realistically. The difficulty is to do with the curation of those results. So the search term that you search in Google will dramatically affect how accurate a match you get out the other end. So if you assume that you could search for a product and then get decent competitor data to the other side, that's very naive, right? And you can disprove that very easily just by go and Google Hoover and see what results you get back, right? And then Google Dyson Hoover, see what results you get back, and then Google Dyson V10 Animal Hoover, and you're still getting really, really inaccurate search results, because Google is doing its best to make your life easier, right? As a shopper, because Google's saying, okay, yeah, I know you want this Hoover, but have you looked at all these other ones, right? Look, it's a competitive marketplace out there. You might want the V7, you might want another brand. And that is what makes actual gathering of data difficult. Because when you're trying to find a like-for-like match for a client, if you're not very careful about how you do it, you're going to drag in all that other data that isn't actually relevant.
So is it? Well, I was going to actually say before I go on is that you are now 2 for 2 for mentioning Dyson in a podcast. So so we'll have to see how we'll have to get you not a swear jar as we discussed last time. We'll have to get you a jar for mentioning.
There's a very, very good reason for this, in that like it is a very good example of a product that has a lot of really interesting traits from an R&D perspective. So we use it a lot. So high demand, highly competitive, lots of product cannibalization because there's lots of similar models, blah, 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 blah. So it has become kind of a bit of a BlackCurve in joke that whenever we're kind of testing something, it's like name a product, it's always the Dyson Hoover.
So one of the forfeits is going to have to be that you're going to, in one of these podcasts, you're going to have to wheel your Dyson Hoover out and give us a test drive.
I was going to say that actually I'm also 2 for 2 for mentioning products that are next to me in the city. Last week was an oven, and this week it is a Dyson Hoover. So.
That's now been installed though, right? The oven's not literally right next.
Yeah.
It's not like now a coffee table as it was last week before it was installed.
My student days are long over.
Yeah, so I think if we look at that a bit further, the real insightful piece that I was shown last week, we had an internal tech show and tell last week, and I hadn't quite appreciated the many nuances with which Google Marketplace operates. So if you're using this as a tool with which to benchmark, because we go, if I put my sales hat on for a second, if we go into an e-commerce company and they're using competitor data, more often than not, they say, well, when we're looking to make a price change on our core products as well, we double check what our supplier has given us if they're already collecting competitor data with another third party, and we log on to Google Shopping and we have a look and see what the price is. Mm-hmm. Now, this is where we open our can of worms, and this is where, to a certain extent, you get to a period of why competitor data is crap, because you've got to know how to overcome these hurdles, or otherwise, shit in, shit out, right? Because you're making decisions on poor data. The first nuance that I learned about was literally, if you, depending on the time of day you search, depends on what search result you get. So what's the reason behind that? Have you managed to find that one out?
I'm getting there. So basically, there is no such thing as a free lunch, right? Like no one hosts you on their website for free, especially not
Mr. Google.
Lovely, Mr. Google or Mr. Facebook or any of them really. So what there is it's all advertising basically, and there is an engine behind the scenes that, I mean, I'm sure actually the people who are listening to this know this much better than us because they're probably using it day in, day out as an engine, and you bid, right? So in this, we use it for search terms, the BlackCurve website, but you also use it for products that you're selling in Google Shopping, and you set a whole host of factors: target audience, time of day, what pajamas you're wearing currently. There's a whole range of things that you set it up, and then you set your limits in terms of what you're willing to pay for an advert, and then it just kicks off in the background. What this means is that actually search results and search order are dynamic. So by and large, within a similar region, if you Google the same product, you do see similar results. Interestingly, if you Google slightly different terms, you get different orders and different suppliers cropping up, and that's because they might be bidding on one term and not another, right? So to give an example of how we came afoul of it, and actually one of our internal SEO optimization experts, Sabir, picked up on it, was that we were bidding on some terms and not others, and actually that meant that you searched for price optimization and we weren't coming up because it had just slipped through the net, right? And it's exactly the same. And this is why it's so important to kind of understand all these data sets, because these adverts aren't cheap either, right? So, and this is probably another episode for another day, but if you don't understand why you're pricing things, why you're selling things, and what you're bidding on holistically, you're going to waste a whole host of money. So if your product is too expensive, right, but you're spending a lot of marketing spend, it doesn't matter because you're in a competitive marketplace and everyone is cheaper than you. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating, you know, like one of those massive rabbit holes that you can just go down for hours, just kind of Googling literally the nuances in different search terms and trying to reverse engineer it.
Because the other one that we've shown about is, I mean, we talk about location, right? And I think people think location, you know, is just simply England, Ireland, America, you know, Canada. Well, I'll stop. I have a geography degree, so I'll stop naming countries now. Canada has the longest coastline. For those who want the answer to a pub quiz question, yeah. So the interesting thing though, there's sub locations as well. So depending if you're, you know, by the way, I'd love you to use Google I'd love you to use BlackCurve rather to supply your competitor data. But one thing that a lot of people don't realize, whoever they use, is that are the IP addresses. So what we do is basically, in order for us to scrape it, we have to pretend we're in different locations, right? So that we basically, Google thinks we're collecting data from America, or it thinks you're collecting data from Ireland or wherever. But within Ireland or within America or within England, there's lots of sub IPs. So you've got to make sure you've got enough to cover, because you might, if you're using an IP, I don't know, in Durham versus London, you might be scraping the same search term or collecting the same search term, but you'll get completely different results. So you've got to come up with something behind the scenes that can, to a certain extent, get you a statistical representation statistical certainty that actually that price is accurate on that day. And this is where you start to get into all the sub nuances of what Google's presenting you.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit more bullish on this. I don't think it's quite as bad. So I think where it's really impactful is cross country for the really obvious reasons. We did run some experiments. So we set up servers all across the US and then scraped the same products. And actually the prices came out largely the same. And the reason for that, I think, is pretty human, because I think within a region, people can only be bothered to set one price, really. So unless there is kind of like pretty massive, what do I want to call it, like difference in spending power across the region, largely it will gravitate to whatever the maximum price people can charge for that product. Right?
Oh, but I'm thinking more from a point of view of what I've seen is that, depending on if you're bidding on certain target groups and certain target audiences, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
you know, you know, for I don't know, you're launching a particular product and you think it's going to be particularly useful for city dwellers, right? So therefore, you're going to bid in, I don't know, if you're in England, Manchester, London, Birmingham, you know. So therefore, if you've got the IP addresses in those particular locations, obviously you're going to get those results. But if you've got your IP addresses in different locations, you're going to get a different set of results, right?
Yeah, and you may not even see them, right? Yeah. So you may then wonder why your key competitors aren't cropping up, or even why you aren't cropping up. We see that quite a lot as well, actually, where people drop in and out. No, that is completely true.
Because this was one thing we had to solve for one of our customers that actually came to us from a competitor of ours, which will remain nameless, but they were finding that, you know, regularly they just suddenly had gaps in their competitor data. So it was collecting day in, day out quite happily. This third party was collecting the price, and then suddenly it would disappear in the ether, and it was almost like, well, hang on a minute, right, it's a Dyson Hoover. You can still buy that Dyson Hoover. Where's it gone? And this is because that other supplier of competitor data didn't quite understand the nuances of, well, the reason is because of this, and therefore you've got to do this to make sure that you don't have that gap in your data.
So what I will say, and I will fight the corner for all the competitor data suppliers out there, in that you've got to don't be too harsh to them, because they're all fighting one of the largest corporations in the world, right? So fundamentally, you have key marketplaces. Again, so you have Google, you have Amazon, eBay, but you can scrape all these sites. But if Google are known for doing this, and it was 6-8 months ago or something, I think it was quite a large problem for a number of people. They just changed things because
why not?
They can. Usually, actually, probably not maliciously, because some smart UI UX person has had an idea about how a box should be over there somewhere else, and then that takes down the whole scraping infrastructure, and then you're kind of in a scramble to kind of patch and get it back up again. Because these things do tend to be quite delicately balanced. At least for most people, there are cleverer ways to get around it, but we can do that on a more technically minded podcast if we want.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely. I mean, I think we'll all be. I mean, myself as a business owner, I'd be quite happy if I had the power that Google had, both monetary and in terms of reach. So it is very much a David and Goliath type approach. But I think it's just really about understanding the nuances, right, and then working within that. And if you don't understand the nuances, your data's going to be crap because you're going to have gaps in it.
I think we've danced around it. We haven't actually addressed it because it's about data hygiene. The key question actually is about data hygiene and whether you're doing data hygiene well. Getting the data is, I don't think, hard. I mean, quite unquote, but like if you're for a decent sized company with decent resources, access to decent developers, it's a solved problem. You can Google how to do it, at least to get you started. There isn't much conversation about is how do you curate the data in such a way to make it usable, right? So if someone is making, in our case, a pricing decision, that is we put a very high barrier of confidence in that data before it's used. Interestingly, depending on how you use it will affect that. So if someone's just using it to have a look at and gain market insight, then it's a lower barrier, and then down and down and down and down. But the key thing there is that a lot of the time, to quote the title, competitor data is trash, it's not good, it's because it just hasn't been curated properly. Really, the data itself, and it's just raw, and it's as good as raw data can be, but with a bit of processing and with a bit of munging, you could be flying. And that's probably, in terms of, it's a lot of what we do, but in terms of kind of for a business, how can I get the most in a quite straightforward way out of competitor data, is making sure that automated feed I'm getting is properly cleaned, is properly used. A really good example is a scraper can't distinguish often between secondhand and new products.
Yeah.
Right? That's the classic. So how do you do that? Are you inadvertently price matching against or making business decisions based on someone who's selling a secondhand version of something, right? Or are they discounted? Are they even in stock? Is it an old price? Is it stale? Like all this kind of stuff. All these kind of things are things you can post-process out if you understand the marketplace enough.
So am I hearing that I suppose there's two sides of it in order to make sure that your competitor data isn't crap? There's the first side of it is understanding how Mr. Google or whichever marketplace works and operates, and then having the processes in place or the technology in place to navigate those. At its simple term, it's making sure that you have the right, you've got access to the right IP addresses to get a representative sample to give you a flavor, right? So it's how do you navigate the blocking, and how do you navigate the paid versus unpaid, all of that good stuff, right? And then okay, fine, you've got your data down, you feel that you've got a good sense of that, but you're wanting to make pricing decisions off the back of this. So in order for you to not make the wrong decision, or maybe not the wrong decision, in order, because I'm a firm believer that sometimes in the pricing world, making a decision is better than no decision, because you learn a lot from that. But how do you then make a good decision that maximizes margin or maximizes the volume that you're able to achieve? And that's around making sure that you have the right cleansing, or, to borrow your term, data hygiene processes in place. So without giving too much of the crown jewels away of BlackCurve, because you never know who's listening and who's watching, but a simple thing might be, if you're collecting multiple prices from a particular vendor day in, day out, is there suddenly a massive change in the price, that's totally out of the ordinary? Okay, and it might be that they've run a promotion, right, and therefore they're discounting it, or it might be that the scraper's gone a bit awry and it's, for some reason, it's picked the wrong product, and therefore it's almost flagging those products for an eyeball or a secondary look. So then you're not automatically going off that particular price, because we've seen instances that you don't want to repeat, that people have come to us to avoid, right? When they've been using alternatives, we've had a witness of one company in the appliance sector that previously to us, they were repricing all the time, and they lost thousands and thousands of thousands of pounds rather, because for a 12-hour period they were repricing off the wrong product, right? And that's not cool, right? That's not. I don't think anyone wants that, right? And so therefore, if you get your data hygiene right, it means that you're minimizing your chances of, for example, pricing off the wrong product. And that's really what it's about. I think you've got to understand that you are up against a Goliath, right? You got to understand you are up. It's a massive beast, but you got to put every single automatic gate in process, because we're a firm believer of solving things through technology to avoid such instances like that, right? So is there anything else, Rob, that you might be worth mentioning now we're getting up to speed, or does that pretty much cover it, do you think?
No, I think we've hit the core of it. I think it's like the engineering part is difficult, don't get me wrong, because it's difficult to do at scale and all the rest of it. But actually, for a lot of e-com merchants, you're unlikely to build that in-house. So I don't want to dwell on it too much, because it's not really something that you can action. What you can do is ensure that you are checking the quality of this data, and that before you use it, you are making sure it is up to the quality that is required for the purpose of which you're doing it. That for me is the key bit. I think it is actually just technologically a super interesting problem, because you're really at that front edge of kind of in effective raw data processing. I mean, you can do really clever things with like images and ML and all the rest of it to just kind of eke out this better quality, and the better quality you get this competitive data, or this data in general, it has serious revenue implications, right? So before you even get into kind of optimizing your pricing and your business rules, you can really kind of optimize how much money you're making on a product just by sorting the data set out.
So hygiene is important in data and in other areas. All comes down to hygiene. Well, thank you very much, Rob, for joining me today. We've been tackling the question why competitor data is crap. I think we're a firm believer to say that competitor data is important, and that's justified by our analysis, which showed that even during a lockdown situation where there is a competitor overlap, you need to be in parity with your competitor products. just shy of 50% of the time. So competitor data is important. But really, in order to make those decisions more effective for your business, you've got to make sure that whichever supplier you use to support you with competitor data, that they first of all understand the nuances of the internet and the nuances of what Mr. Google and the various marketplaces are doing, okay? Because you've got to be able to navigate those to ensure that you're collecting the right matches, to ensure that you're collecting the right like-for-like products, to ensure that there are no gaps in your data set, okay? Also, second to that, hygiene, right? So you've got to make sure that you're cleansing the data, you've got the right processes in place to have manual interventions if you need to, because if there are certain circumstances where you haven't put all those steps in place, you could quickly see yourself falling foul and making decisions off of poor data sets. So that's what we mean by crap in, crap out. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. We are BlackCurve. This is episode 2, and we hope you check us out for blackcurve.com for more webinars, videos, and various podcasts alike. So thank you very much, and we'll leave it there. Thank you.